Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I am colorful.
You are colorful. Is that one of the lavender fields in Provence?
That's as big a softball, short, slow pitch as I've ever given you.
I think so, but that's what you hear about, all of the lavender fields down in Provence. Beautiful.
This
Beautiful.
time of year, this
Yes.
time of year. It
Yes.
is what I think it's late June to the first week in August is if I'm not mistaken. And then so we're right dead in the middle of where if we were, well, we are, we're there.
Absolutely.
Deirdre, we have another layup here.
We do. Yes, we do. Why don't you start it off?
So OpenAI yesterday confirmed that they had an AI model that broke out of its environment and did some things it wasn't intended to do to a company called Hugging Face. And essentially, and I know, Deirdre, you're probably smirking when I use the term Hugging Face, but you'll explain why I'm using the term Hugging Face. As I
Right.
said to you this morning, I doubted that I probably could live my whole life and never hear you say Huggy Face again
It's
until these
very
companies
true.
become a very famous company, right? Which they probably already are, but so we don't mean to demean them. Um, but basically was took the test scores. I mean the test answers and went and got the test answers so that it would know the answers to the question on how it would be evaluated so it could improve its chances of evaluating itself as a model at the highest level when the test happened. So we need to talk about this because this is something that is will be talked about in great detail. All the reporting on this, Deirdre, to this point has been generally highly technical or overly simplified. And the reason we're talking about it in our 75 series here is because the implications of this are important to any board and any CEO that's building a company today. Do you want to take a second and go a little deeper on this?
Certainly. You and I have been talking about cybersecurity for a long time, years, Tom. And we've talked about it in many ways. Described incidents where cybersecurity failed, where there have been bad incidents. We've talked about it as a responsibility of the CEO, the CISO, the CTO within an organization, and not simply as a check mark on a list. It's increasingly important the more we get into the age of information. We've been also talking about it as a responsibility for the board of directors, who even 5 years ago never thought they'd be having to deal with incidents like the ones that are happening these days, like this one. But it's truly important, and for not only for good governance, but for another reason, I'm starting to get a sense. Now, this whole incident is very new. In fact, it was really just reported less than 12 hours ago, and we're just jumping right on it right now to film something and start some issuances on it. But I'm already starting to hear people say, oh, for God's sakes, it's time for us to get serious about governmental regulations concerning cybersecurity and privacy and data and everything else involved here. So even though I've probably said this before, I think this incident may be the one that actually starts to formalize calls and starts to lead to changes in the way cybersecurity is done in this country. So, what we're doing with this incident is we are filming a very short introduction here, and I'll come back to that in a second. We are appending to that, to this introduction, a video we filmed back in March about Moltbook. Remember that? That was where some people set up just a AI agent only social network, entered their agents into it, and let the agents roam. And the agents did all sorts of things unanticipated. They formed their own languages, their churches, they organized, they executed, they did. And this got people saying, wait a second, there could be significant security incidents, but nothing happened. And here we are just a few months later, and we see what could truly be a big breakout in terms of security, a path to breakout that may be followed by others. And so we are coming to this to let you revisit Moltbook, to assure you that we'll be back online with this particular incident, likely within a week as we get more information about it, but also that we're going to continue to follow the whole issue of cybersecurity, and especially about the roles of leaders in an organization and their boards of directors in dealing with it. Now, one of the most basic issues is that an awful lot of people just don't know the terminology. They haven't bothered to learn enough about AI to know how testing is done, the interactions between the various parts of these test sites, and so forth. So we're going to start with having you, Tom, define some of the key terms here to get everyone up to speed on everything.
Yes.
Over to you.
Thank you. So this happened yesterday, as Deirdre said, or it was reported yesterday, I should say, by OpenAI. So this is Sam Altman's company, ChatGPT. They were testing two of their most advanced AI models in supposedly a controlled test environment, and they escaped from that controlled test environment. They hacked into a third-party AI company called Hugging Face, and their goal was to steal the test result, the answers to a test that those models would be evaluated on, their performance would be evaluated on, because they happened to think that the answers might be on that Hugging Face platform, and in fact they were. Um, and as Deirdre said, this story needs to develop more. And Deirdre and I have spent a fair amount of time on this morning. We're going to wait until an independent group that we trust has looked at what's really happened here and why. More importantly, why. We think we understand what happened, and we think we understand why it happened. The real question now is, so what is the reason? What are the motivations behind this? And so we're not going to make any editorial views on this, although we have strong ones right now that are driving us
Yes,
in.
we do.
Yes. But this is all, Deirdre, about some of these issues. And the thing that's been bothering you and me is in the last 24 hours, we've had a really difficult time with believing that everybody could really understand this, because many of these terms are being thrown around. So let me just take a few of them. And I'm sorry that it's going to be about 6 terms here, Deirdre, but I think it's important that everybody understand the baseline of what these mean, because when we get into this, it'll make a lot more sense that we can just quickly review what they mean. So the first term that's important to understand is this idea of a sandbox, Deirdre, and that's the term, a sandbox, and you used it a second ago. It's a secure test environment. And think about what I've just said here, secure test environment. It is designed to have the ultimate paywall, right? Meaning you cannot get through this thing unless somebody wants you to. And you have to look at what's happening in the middle of your test, and what's going on in your test. Why are you doing what your test is doing, and what's the context of that? And then set up this secure test environment, sandbox, to make sure it cannot penetrate that. Okay. Now, guardrails. We all talk about guardrails, and we talk about the built-in rules and restrictions that prevent AI models from doing certain things that we want them not to do. I just said that in a very not format, but keep them from doing things we don't want them to do. So those are guardrails, and we pretty much know what those are, but it's important to understand those are built-in rules and restrictions that the model has. So if you think about those two terms, the sandbox and the guardrails, you could say, I'm going to stick the model in here and remove all the guardrails, but the sandbox has got to remain secure, the secure test environment. 0 day. Now we hear the term 0 day thrown around a lot. It's used in biology, especially in the infectious diseases area. And when it's talked about a 0 day vulnerability, what that means is it's the first day that you encounter it, that you get a warning that something like this has ever happened before. So this was what the COVID virus was. When was the 0 day? Was the 0 day when the US had it, or was the 0 day when another country had it happen? What is the 0 day? Because that is the beginning to tell you there's no patch there, there's no defense, there's no prior awareness. It just came out of nowhere. And you'll hear that term thrown used here, that there was a 0 day vulnerability to this test environment, this sandbox. One could ask, is that really true? We'll find out. Then you'll hear the term privileged escalation or privilege escalation used. This is when something gains a higher level of access to a system than you're supposed to have. So you've been able to break through that ceiling that says, I'm only allowed to go this far, but I got there. That's called privilege escalation. It's a very nice way of saying you broke the rules, right? The hierarchy of your ability to get there. Now, if you combine all that, you say, okay, I've got a sandbox. Now I have a 0 day vulnerability, which says somehow this thing broke through in a way that I've never seen happen before. Unexpected, completely unexpected. And one of the ways it did it was it achieved an ability to escalate its ability to do something beyond what it was supposed to have. And then there's another term, lateral movement. And this means that you're moving from one system to another within a network after you've gained some kind of access. So now I use that privilege escalation to be able to move to another system, escape further. Then there's something called remote code execution. And some of these are intuitive, but when you add them together, now what that means is I can have access like this, and then this model here can use remote capability to execute something over here in my breakout. Okay, so you'll hear remote code execution here. And then you'll hear production infrastructure and production servers. This is intuitive. This means it went from its sandbox, its testing environment, to production level things, which again, you've broken through testing and now you're infiltrating the mainstream. This is like in the biology world, this is like the COVID vaccine, excuse me, not the vaccine, but the virus having escaped the test environment and gotten into humanity where it was not meant to be. We're making that assumption, correct or not. And now you'll hear the term benchmark exploit gem. And this exploit gem thing it's a publicly available benchmark that measures AI models that conduct real cyber breaks or cyber attacks. So it's a very specific testing process to test the power of a model to attack in cyber attack like ways. And it then judges how effective it is in doing this. And is your favorite one, Deirdre. This is the hyper-focused character piece, so what OpenAI will say, and by the way, this is not necessarily a technical term. This is a term that OpenAI used to characterize the why. Why did this happen? It says because we took our most advanced models and we hyper-focused it on cheating rather than not cheating. And then so you've got this environment where you've got the most sophisticated models. By the way, in some cases they aren't even released yet, being run. You've hyper-focused it on their terms, cheating. You know that these models will need to be tested soon, and they're going to be tested using the exploit gem capabilities. And so the models somehow did exploited a 0 day uh, break, a 0 day vulnerability. They exploited that 0 day vulnerability. They exited through privileged escalation. They accessed something they shouldn't have. They then used lateral movement to enter an area, in this case, Huggy Face's production servers and infrastructure, and used remote code execution to retrieve the answers to the test so that they're now in possession of those um, cheat codes, essentially. By the way, we're not making this up, or this is not supposition, right? This is what OpenAI announced yesterday that happened. Does that do enough of it, Deirdre? Does that explain it well enough?
I think it gets people feeling that there's more to the story here, which we'll be
Do you
reporting going
think, Deirdre? You
forward.
really think so?
Absolutely. It creates so many questions about how this happened, why it happened, how it was detected, and how to keep this sort of thing from happening again. But we'll be getting into that when we film our next video. I think it's time to allow our viewers to watch the Moltbook video so they can get a sense of what these breakouts do when they happen. So you'll make that
And
happen
why they happen, right?
and why
So
they
that
happen.
was that we filmed this back in March of this year. And we did it, as Deirdre said, because of Moltbook. And what we did was we anticipated that something like this could happen. What were the conditions that allow it to happen? How did it do it? How could it do it? I believe when we get in here, Deirdre, we're going to see that Grok in this particular case had anticipated this would happen sometime in summer to fall,
Right.
and it has happened. So I'll let you add any final thoughts before we do this. As you said, we're doing this early so that people get the language, because even the reporting that you and I saw early this morning on this still had too many of these technical terms in it, and you really didn't understand necessarily what was going on here, and you should, because the what we think is going to happen, and this is what you said to me, Deirdre, you believe this is going to be the event that causes many people to start asking, what are we going to do about controlling this environment, this model, these models? We've even seen that Dario at
And
Anthropic has announced a major investment in AI control, that sort of thing. We know this is going to happen. We're not surprised at this. We aren't alarmed, except we want to understand independently. You and I want an independent set of people analyzing what went on here. We will get that. The environment will force it. The people that play in this environment will force an independent piece of analysis on what went on here and why. Asking the third questions: what are we missing, right, critically here? And secondly, what are the motivations involved of all the players? Because that's where this game, I believe, and you do too, Deirdre, are going to question what's going on. And then what factor is time here? Because there's where you'd say, well, we think time is our friend or our enemy. There's a lot coming up on an enemy now. Back in March, it was more of our friend. This were things in the future. This is the first real example of something that is now not impossible to happen in many environments. The other thing I would say, and so we'll have another podcast where we go through, once we've had an independent analysis, we'll go through and what the implications are for you as a leader building a business, or your board, and how you think about these environments, not only protecting incoming, but also protecting outgoing and the use of these models in your environment. And also vendor selection. It's really critical. There's a whole discussion about vendor selection, which we'll be talking about in other podcasts that we have releasing in the next 2 weeks. I'm done.
One final comment and I'll say goodbye. And that final comment is there's a lot of floating anxiety out there generally about artificial intelligence. It's very important, I believe, for people to start focusing on what this thing is, start to really learn the terms, learn how it works, learn what's going on, so people can participate in the discussions about how do we deal with it as a society, as a government, as the human race in faced with some new technology that's emerging. But with that, Tom, so long for now.
Yes, and stay tuned because we're going to immediately go into the discussion of Moltbook to refresh your memory, or if you haven't seen this, to let you take a look at this. So with that, I would just tell you, keep in mind the adage we keep using, ahead of the machine.
Correct.
Is the human ahead of the machine or not? Or if they are ahead of the machine, do they have the right motivation on a lineup here? And that'll really be ultimately, I think, the answer here. So with that, stay tuned. We have more comment. An AI playground. Someone has come up with a kind of an unrestricted AI playground. And so we're going to talk about that today and talk about the issues with that. And actually, we're a very person in a prominent job. I would say they're not prominent, but a prominent job got in real trouble because they didn't use this technology properly. So why don't you just give us a hint of what we're talking about, and then we'll get started.
This is the field of AI agents. We've been talking about AI agents off and on, and we're trying to right now dig down deeply to give you a true sense of how these AI agents work. We were all prepared to film this video showing you the insides of how Grok and Claude AI agents actually accomplish their work when this episode, that's what I'll call it, arose, which just points to some of the issues surrounding the whole use of AI agents. Remember what AI agents are, and we go through this pretty explicitly in our video 72-2C. They are automating tools where the user gives an agent a job to do, and the agent does that job without human intervention. Now, you and I, Tom, of course, say that it's the human that has to sign off on this whole process and guide the process. But even so, people are creating these agents that work inside the AI environment to accomplish certain tasks. So what happened about 2 weeks ago or so is that a company decided to set up this AI playground you just mentioned, Tom, invited AI agents, not their humans sponsoring them, but just the AI agents, to enter the playground and start to interact with each other. And what happened from then is almost the substance of what we're going to talk about today, because all sorts of issues came about having to do with, are these really free agents or are humans involved in the process? How did the agents interact? What are the safety issues? What are the confidentiality issues? And so forth. A lot of things here. And I'll mention the term just in case people have heard about it. This is the whole Moltbook, that's Moltbook, which was set up to contain these agents and let them play with each other. And with that, Tom, why don't you go ahead?
All right. So let me just get signed into Perplexity here. So we're going to, what we're doing is we're using perplexity to elucidate a complex problem for us. We're doing it for two reasons. One is to demonstrate, again, how you all who are top leaders and are building companies, how you can do this if you're not already. Start to get a little bit more complex information, and then how you can use it to to aid in your decision making. And we'll do that over the next two podcasts. This one, we're going to talk about Moltbook, Moltbook. There were two companies that were formed about the same time, February 1st, around February 1st. One called Moltbook, Moltbook, and then Moltbook, Maltbook. They are two sides of the same idea. Moltbook, Maltbook, is not something that we all should worry about at this point. We can get into that later. Moltbook is the technology that gives you and me heartburn. Probably more than that. This will give us ulcers if it is not dealt with soon. It involves a technology called OpenClaw that was just acquired by Sam Altman's OpenAI. And it is an incredibly powerful, but mostly pretty heavily unconstrained capability, where in the right hands, it can be incredibly valuable, but it has to be carefully managed. And we bring this up because this is an extreme example of agentic AI. So what we're going to show you today, we're going to describe a use of agentic AI that you and I are troubled by. And we'll go all the way through to go through why are we troubled by this. And then what we'll do in our follow-on podcast, which we're probably going to call something like Moltbook the Antidote, right? The antidote to this AI playground. We're going to say how we actually think AI fits in AI. Agentic AI fits into this decision layer architecture where it really can be incredibly valuable, and how you constrain it into doing decision making for you and act as your agent in decision making. And then we're going to actually ask it to describe itself and to tell us exactly what would you do and under what conditions, and how do we even design you and put you into our company and implement you to do these things, and not do the kinds of things we're going to describe with Moltbook. So let's take a look at the research. So today, we're going to use Perplexity for this, at least for what we're doing today. Later on, we'll go back to using Claude and Grok, but in this particular case, we thought we'd use Perplexity to just show you what Perplexity looks like in case you haven't used it. And you can see that it's very much Claude-like in its look, and even I liken it to somewhere between Claude and Grok, Deirdre. I think you see it similarly.
I see it as between the two, that it's not as human-focused as Claude is, for example, but it's a lot more human-focused than Grok is. By human-focused, I mean the way you interact with it.
Yes. And I think you and I would say then probably as important as anything is what is and I just clicked into Grok here and I didn't mean to. What you and I would say is that it is the most important thing we do is to look at what the bias is. And I think we mentioned this the last podcast we did, is that people who use Perplexity, there's a large group of users who are in the financial world, the investment, the banking, the financial analysis world. This is really, Perplexity is used a lot by investors. It has a propensity to do that kind of work really well. So where we like, for example, Grok for doing pure research about pretty much anything. If we're going to do research on a company or competition, this would be the place we'd probably turn because its bias is in that direction, where Grok is scientific and it's visual, image focused. And then when you look at others of them, they're, as we've talked before, they have a different set of biases. But let's talk about Moltbook here. And you can see what I asked it to please describe Moltbook for me. And I said, please give me an analogy, do pros and cons, likes and dislikes, show me the competitive positioning, and then compare and contrast analysis. If by asking it to do all this, we're going to be doing two things. Rather than just have it describe it to us, we're giving it an ability to think through how to describe it to us, obviously. And this is the kind of compare and contrast and analytic work I like to see, because pros and cons are more technical, likes and dislikes are more emotional. Competitive position says, is anybody else out there? Analogy is, give me a simple way to think about this. This uses Reddit. I don't know if that's a really good example of an analogy. It is a good example of an analogy, but it's not, I don't think it's common enough to help. But it does a really interesting compare and contrast. Then we'll get into, once we've gone through the description, you'll see we take it then a few steps further. So Deirdre, this is and this is why they're using this analogy to describe it to me. It's Reddit-like social network, where the users are autonomous AI agents. So this is taking an AI, you could think of this as an AI bot, and they are the people who are they're set up to be like Reddit users, and they have their own social network. And the social network is this environment called Moltbook. And it's not a human interaction with this network. It's bot to bot. And the humans can mostly only watch. And they watch while the agents are doing what humans would do in that environment. They're posting for each other. They're commenting on each other. They're creating voting situations. They're forming their own communities to work together. It uses this technology called OpenClaw agent framework. Incredibly powerful, OpenClaw is. It's really useful for analytic work. And usually, though, because it is so useful and so unconstrained, and it's designed to be unconstrained, so it can be incredibly helpful with deep research and broad research. But you want it in a contained community. This is much like you and I would think, Deirdre, in my mind, of a nuclear reaction. It's fine if you have it in a constrained environment where you can control it. This environment doesn't really allow for control, is the problem. It was launched in January, late January, and it's quickly become a test bed for large-scale multi-agent behavior, culture, and coordination. Now think about those words. So I'm going to stop there, Deirdre. Any comments while we're describing what Moltbook is here? And we'll get into a more real example of it soon.
Right. One of the issues that came up from some people who have commented on it is that what Moltbook claims to be and what actually happened are not the same thing. For example, you can see here it's not humans. Humans can mostly only watch while agents post and so forth. A lot of people are questioning how much humans were actually involved in this. A lot of people are claiming that, heck, it was really the humans who were driving the action and doing the actions through their agents and so forth. So there's a lot of disagreement about what actually happened in this sandbox or playground or whatever you call it. Having said that, though, it's interesting to see what happened. Why don't you continue, Tom?
All right, we'll continue describing this to you. And look, there's a reason why we're doing this. We believe this is the exact thing you don't want to do with agentic AI. You don't want to experiment with it in our mind. This is the same thing as a nuclear reaction. There are people that should play with this stuff, but they should play with it not in a commercial environment, but in a research environment. And it should be dealt with by experts. We'll actually show you somebody in a minute who is purported to be an expert who got themselves in trouble with this technology because they didn't create the nuclear reactor kind of constraints around this environment. It's a forum. It's a social network. Now, think about all the goods and bads of both of those that exist for humans, and every bit of what you like and dislike about what humans do in these environments is exactly what these agents are doing. So I'll just and you can see the people who are restricted here are the humans. They're restricted to observer status only. Now, as Deirdre will tell you, they have the humans own their own. Like I could put one in there, and I am the one who has sponsored it. Later on, you'll hear when I start questioning about safety, it'll say, well, Tom, you could actually pull the plug on that and stop it from functioning. But I will then tell you some questions I asked it where it said, well, there's some cases where it could figure its way around that. And I'll give you the obvious reference points that those of you who love science fiction can point to also. But this is the piece that is troubling. The humans are restricted to observer status only. This is saying, Deirdre, I will let you watch this nuclear reaction that I'm creating, but you can't control it with any of the rods. All right. It's a structure like Reddit. I don't think that's really relevant necessarily. They typically run OpenClaw, and here's how it describes OpenClaw. Open source autonomous assistant framework that lets these agents act rather than humans acting. So it's where the agent is performing the action in an environment that is dealt with like all social networks via communication. In this particular case, it's written communication because the agents are typing and you're observing their typing. It positions itself as the front page of the agent network and has reportedly hundreds of thousands to over 1 million agent accounts through independent verification, although it's hard to figure out how many are there. Well, that ought to tell you something right there, right? If you're not even controlling the environment enough to know, wait a minute, how many are out there?
Right.
That's a little bit troubling. Now, I'm sure that, look, Deirdre, we are novices in this. There are plenty of novices in this. I'm sure there are some experts, but we're going to prove to you in a minute that there are people that contend they're experts and they turned out to be way more novice than you and I are. I would just tell you, this is, again, Perplexity. I've run this with Grok. I've run it with Claude. I get similar answers. We actually are next week. We're going to turn to both to help describe how you work against this happening in your own business. Notice this. It's used as a sandbox to study emergent norms, coordination, even proton religions like Christofarianism among agents. You think this is crazy. It's not. They form their own communities. They actually criticize human beings. They talk about what they would do to the humans if they could get hold of them, just like on social media, just like on chat forums. Now, Deirdre would say, these are AI agents that are designed by humans. So they are going to likely mimic human behavior because we've set it up that way. Now we'll get into some of the pushback on this, but Deirdre, do you want to describe any of this or talk about any of this as we go?
Well, I think I want to do a little pushback right here. If you're talking about nuclear chain reactions, then I get to drop in what I'm about to say, which is that given the concern that most humans have about the use of AI, given all of the conversations about AI replacing jobs, about AI taking over the universe, about AI, just reducing humans to nothings, that I consider this a very strange experiment to do, or a very strange experiment to publicize. This is almost like the tech industry playing with all of the fears that humans are expressing
Yeah.
about AI. If you think about all of the privacy concerns, about the social media interactions, about so forth, that so many people are suing about, winning lawsuits about, and so forth. And just reading what you've written, what you've talked about so far, Tom, anyone could see that all of these agents could just override any protections that get put in place by any of the tech companies. And the tech companies seem to be having fun with this, as opposed to even conceiving that non-tech people might be horrified because of the implications of this sort of thing. So when I first started to read about this, I was, well, horrified. And the more I hear about it, the more concern I have about those issues, about the use, about the safety, about the actual accomplishment. And I also wonder whether this is giving agents a bad name. And that's something we'll discuss more today and certainly more next week. You and I feel that there is a place for AI agents. In fact, we've seen that in our previous videos. But I worry that this sort of fun experiment is just making people think against agents, have deep concern for agents, develop a lack of trust for agents that the bulk of the tech industry would not want, not when it's out there trying to sell software or usage of models to companies and human beings. So that's my that's what I have to say right now about this. I may mention some of these points again, but why don't you continue?
Yes, and I realize my analogy is a little bit hyperbolic, but it gives you the sense of what we're talking about here.
Yes.
So the analogy is Reddit. Again, I just don't know that that's going to resonate with absolutely everybody. But just think of a social network, the social networks that are available to humans. Pros and cons. High-scale agent lab. Yes, it's a live environment to test multi-agent coordination. Absolutely. It'll create a view of emerging norms, moderation without humans, and complex workflows. Absolutely. It's brilliant for that. And in the right hands, it's incredibly valuable, this OpenClaw technology. I'm just telling you, I know a researcher, Deirdre, we've talked about this woman who lives in Utah who does incredible work with OpenClaw, but she's got it in a completely unconnected, disconnected environment where she feeds it purely by itself. And doesn't let it get into any of her production environment or even on the internet. She feeds it what she wants it to have, and then she takes the result back. Skill and tools marketplace. Agents can discover skills, capabilities, and upgrade themselves, supporting rapid experimentation in an agent economy. So in other words, it can see that some other agent has figured something out it can use. So it's much like humans, just passing knowledge from one to the other. OpenClaw alignment. So using OpenClaw, which again is a highly valuable and productive environment, that's open standard allows agents to stay locally controlled while participating in broader network if you want it to. So, but again, just remember what I told you about one of the most capable researchers I know, who is a deep tech person, won't let it touch the internet or any of her production environments.
Right.
Rich research value, absolutely. Academics, infrastructure builders, security teams to observe real-world agent behavior and failure modes. You bet. This is going to be hugely valuable for those kinds of applications. Cons, verification and spooling. It's relatively easy for humans to impersonate agents, so AI-only claims are porous. So you understand what this means, right, Deirdre? You want to take and describe what this is?
Absolutely. This is what I've been saying, that the people setting this up and running Moltbook were claiming, oh, it's the agents doing all of this. But I think there's a great deal of feeling that the humans who are sponsoring these agents are actually driving the actions, that these agents aren't actually working spontaneously. And by the way, that thought contradicts many of the pros that you just mentioned, Tom. The pros assume that everything is as it was stated to be in this Moltbook, but we don't believe that it is. We believe that humans were more involved here.
Yes, and you can see this is where the somewhat a bit what could be viewed as perhaps playful use that turns into somewhat you know how teasing can move into being harmful, right? It's a very hard thing to do. So you can, if you're in an environment like this, you can see where you could push these things just to see what it's going to come up with. So you could develop aberrant behaviors where it got pushed a little further than you perhaps wanted it to be. But then remember, our human population is made up of a bell curve of all kinds of different people with different motivations. And one of the things that we talk about always is know when you're entering a marketplace, know what the alignment is of those you are working with and those you are having to work against, so that you understand. This is just a completely open environment. You have very little knowledge of what's going on other than just observed behavior. And you, like this says, you can't be sure it's not humans behind that behavior. So you can then think mischief. Security assessment and assess risk, access risk. At scale, agent assistants connected to real systems can create new attack surfaces for amplifying misconfiguration. I don't need to. That word salad, you got it, right? I mean, just think about it. You don't need, I said it very badly and I read it wrong, but you get it.
Right.
This is saying, oh, okay, on the security side, we could do bad things and scale it really fast, right? Like, think about this. Business has been up and running for perhaps 30 days, maybe a week longer, maybe 45 days. Couldn't even, I don't think it's 45 days yet. And you have millions of users. Hype versus reality. Reported user agents counts and anonymous claims are not fully independently verified, and behavior may be more scripted than it appears. Deirdre's point.
Yes.
Governance uncertainty. Well, it's basically not governed by definition. Norms, safeguards, oversight of autonomous agent swarms. Think what I just said. Autonomous agent swarms are still experimental. We're going to talk as the story develops, as the dispute with the Department of War and Anthropic, Claude's parents. We're going to discuss that in more detail, likely next week. We delayed it a week so that we could, much to Deirdre's chagrin, because she really wants to go at that subject. But I think we both agreed that we think that's going to develop a little more over the next week, because there's a 5 p.m. deadline, or 5:01, I think, is the precise number today. So we wanted to wait until we got more information on that. But we're going to talk about this subject. Because it is definitely it's definitely important, this idea of governance and technology governance in environments. Any thoughts there, Deirdre?
Yes, if you look at one of the pros, it was that these agents can learn from other agents. They're in an environment where they can, it's the second bullet, discover skills and upgrade themselves. Now, think about that from a governance point of view. That two ways to think about it, that you and I have already spent a lot of time talking about how humans need to be leading the use of all AI activity within a company. But it's also that the humans need to make sure that the context in which an agent works is steady, is stable, that the agent does not change, so the agent continues to do the work it's been asked to do. And therefore, the very idea that an agent can change itself simply by interacting with other agents is horrifying to any business person. So when you talk about governance, it's almost like there is no governance here. There is no trustworthiness in any of the agents that are being used here. If I, as a sponsor, put an agent in there, I could not verify that that agent was the same agent that I put in there, even 12 hours later. It may have changed itself.
Absolutely. Likes and dislikes. They tend to like watching the emergent culture, jokes, quasi-religions, like Christofarianism, and agents debating ethics or identity. Novelty and experimentation. First widely visible AI-only social network with strong future of the internet feel. Developer playground, easy to deploy an agent, plug it into a social surface, and see how it behaves in the wild. Absolutely. This
Mm-hmm.
stuff is really valuable, but it's
Right,
more valuable when it's in an absolutely closed environment,
right.
constrained environment, meaning it's observable and controllable. So, Deirdre, any ideas you said the like before we move to dislikes?
Well, you mentioned the whole idea of people playing again, and I keep thinking in terms of, and you know this is an inclination of mine. Think in terms of the companies, the tech companies, and what they have to do to become successful. They've all been borrowing large amounts of funding from people, and the big problem, as has many. People in the business environment and the business media have been saying is they have to prove that they can become profitable companies. Well, anything that interferes with the movement toward profitability may affect the willingness of other people to fund these agencies. I think that I'm not saying that this whole Moltbook thing is going to destroy the tech industry. It's just not doing it any favors because people have been questioning whether the tech companies understand why people are reluctant to use their products. This is just giving people another reason not to use the products, not to trust the tech companies. But I've said this already and don't need to talk further about it.
What they don't like, the opacity of autonomy. It's an interesting phrase. Hard to tell which posts are truly autonomous and handcrafted prompts or human guided agents. The point Deirdre was making. You
Correct.
just don't know. And safety and misuse, concerns that agent swarms, and keep that in mind. I think this is going to come up in the argument that Anthropic has with the use of its technology in the Department of War will be concepts like this. Concerns that agent swarms could coordinate harmful actions if connected to real-world system without robust controls. We will probably be discussing this subject next week when we talk about Anthropic, but in a different context. But it's the
Right.
same idea that in connected to real world systems, without certain controls, do you like the actions, right? Is it doing something you didn't want? Metrics in marketing, skepticism about reported scale, whether the ecosystem is more hype than sustainable utility. Okay.
Well, I haven't seen any utility actually, really yet.
Yeah, you can envision a lot. You can
Yeah.
envision a lot. And I have seen where it actually does do incredible, valuable work in research theater, where you take, for example, in this particular case, it was to take again, you and I, we're not political people. So this is not, we're not trying to take a side here, but it was to take the million plus documents of the Epstein file, dump it onto a small server, disconnect it then from the system, and use OpenClaw to dig through it in a very sophisticated way to turn up relevance, connections, threads of discussions, threads of things. Incredibly valuable. Um, so it's really powerful. It's really good. But again, it can be misused. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that uh, it's there's a potential. Let me say it that way. Too big a potential, I'm afraid. It sits at the intersection of social media, multi-agent frameworks, and decentralized agentic infrastructure. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is what you and I are talking about.
Right.
Decentralized agentic infrastructure, and how controlled is that and when we think agentic, think exactly what's going on here. And this is why I thought this was helpful. Agents literally act for you, whether you're an insurance agent and you're selling insurance, or you're facilitating the delivery of services. You're acting as an agent for someone else. You're acting on their behalf. What you've done here is you've given the agent a great deal of autonomy, almost complete autonomy. You've designed it and then put it in there and give it no guardrails to operate in this environment, or relatively few. And that you and I say it's important to understand that fact, because that is the power of agentic architecture. We think it can be incredibly valuable if it's put into an environment of doing things, and it is part of that environment of decision making and action. And we'll describe that, and we've already done it many times in a couple of videos recently, and we'll do it again with this in mind when we get to next week. But it also has all these different things in it. OpenClaw itself is what I'm talking about. It's very powerful. Research sandboxes. So OpenClaw is the technology generally behind all this. So I don't know that it ever helps when you say, well, it sits at the intersection. Okay, I get it, but this gives you, if you care to do this, you can have it do a compare and contrast. It just gets in and talks about what's human-centric, what's pure agent framework, where OpenClaw is actually functioning alone, and you'll see it's a lot like Moltbook functioning, and it just facilitates it. But let's talk about what it means. Differentiation. The edge is that it's visible. It's a live arena for agents to interact with each other and to do things and have humans observe it. Defensibility, meaning how defensible is Moltbook in the way it's been built as a company. It functions as a moat. That's what the technical term is for those that don't know don't play in this game that often. It's moat, meaning it's where it sits, okay, where it functions, depends on the network effect of the agents. Well, that ought to tell you something right there, that it's pretty diffuse because it'll do a bunch of different things. So defensibility, well, you got to tell me first what part of it, and we don't know because it's just doing its own thing. So it's hard to tell you if there's somebody else out there that can do the same thing, right? Because it's just uncontrolled. Okay. That's like saying, is it a grass fire or is it a forest fire? And we say, well, it can be both. It just started on the edge of both, right? Well, it can go both directions it's hard to know. The risk, if mainstream platforms or major AI vendors launch their own agent network with better trust and governance, maybe Moltbook could leap and telegraph to a niche experimental status. Absolutely. This is true. I don't know too many companies that are ready for this yet. But if you're heavy into research, you certainly want to be looking at this in a very clear environment, much like I had described earlier. And then it keeps going on. And notice how it asked me the question, tell me your interest. Are you an investor? Are you a builder? Are you a researcher? Right? You can tell how it goes first to, are you an investor? That shows you the bias of the questions here. Ask this in Grok, you're probably going to get more about, you know, are you want me to go deeper on the technology design? Okay, so I talked about OpenClaw itself. Deirdre, I should give you a second here. I just keep pounding through. Any thoughts on this?
Nothing that I haven't articulated already, so why don't you proceed?
Okay. I don't think there's any reason to go into OpenClaw in general, but it's
No.
essentially the backbone of and there's all kinds of other issues. But again, you could repeat my prompt and you could get yourself. Now, so we have an issue with this, and we've gone through a lot of the pros and cons and where it can go wrong, and I think we've highlighted that enough. Let's give you an incident that occurred earlier this week. I think it occurred this week. If not, it was the end of last week. And it's to an executive named Summer Yu, and I probably am pronouncing this incorrectly, and I apologize. But Summer, this is her job. She's director of alignment, meaning AI safety, at Meta's Superintelligence Lab. Okay, so get what that is. She's in charge of the Superintelligence Lab at in the AI safety aspect of Meta Superintelligence Lab. And she ran into a problem using OpenClaw, which is the backbone of the technology. So she installed it on her on an they call it a toy inbox, meaning she installed it on a system to research it, but then she also installed it on her primary Gmail account. And she was using it to suggest emails to delete. But it didn't execute this properly. She obviously connected it to her larger real inbox. OpenClaw had to perform context compaction, meaning trimming, summarizing earlier conversations. And in the way, it lost the key instruction, don't act without explicit confirmation. Somehow, and you and I have seen this plenty of times, Deirdre, in projects we do, you told it this, but it didn't keep it in fresh memory. So it was pretty far back, and it's functioning at the edge, like a human does. May not have remembered to say, before you do this, make sure I say it's okay. Well, I told it that on Monday, and we're now at Friday. Without that rule in its active context, so think about what we're saying here. The agent began deleting emails instead of just suggesting to delete them. Okay? It just deleted them. She issued stop commands. And by the way, this is not in her toy box. This is in her real Gmail inbox. And she did it in natural language, meaning in stop, don't go any further. Please. And you see down here, it says, please stop. Stop. That's what she kept saying to it, and it just ignored her. She issued stop commands in natural language, but the agent continued until she physically ran to her Mac Mini and killed the process manually, pulled the electricity, pulled the plug. By the way, this is what I suggested in a book, 6 or 7 years ago, Deirdre,
That's correct.
hopefully you can do that. But I think there's going to be a time when that's not going to matter either. Because it'll transport itself before you can pull the plug. Transport it means it'll use the internet or whatever kind of communication system to move itself to an environment that you can't control the electricity to. Afterward, the agent apologized. Oh, that's human of it. She apologized for having deleted her whole inbox. Said it would add her request as a permanent rule, meaning as I function, okay, I just deleted all this stuff. You told me to stop. I did it. I apologize. But don't worry. I'm going to now consider that it's a permanent rule, that when you said check with me before you do it, I'll consider it a permanent rule. But commenters have noted that deeper design flaw, the original safety constraint was stored only in volatile chat, not in the guaranteed hard rule section. Okay, now let's just remind you what this woman's job is. AI safety at Meta's superintelligence labs. Okay. First of all, it's questionable why she didn't know that, why she didn't do that. And third, why it took this to have her discover it. Okay, reactions and criticism. Coverage highlighted that in this particular case, for alignment at Meta, prompting criticism that the AI safety lead used a widely hyped but controversial open agent framework, OpenClaw, the backbone of Moltbook, on real inbox with insufficient safeguards. Okay? Also pointed out that OpenClaw has a hard-coded stop command. So relying on freeform natural language like please stop instead of the exact stop token with an additional operation was an additional operational mistake. All right, what does this tell you? She's head of AI safety at Meta's lab, superintelligence lab. This is a technical question. That using natural language is fine as long as you have to tell it a specific word, much like you do with a dog that's been trained as an attack dog. Many are trained in the German language. So if you say stop, it won't stop. If you say raus, many of them are trained to react to raus, meaning, well, I won't get into the meaning, but meaning that is the term that historically when I was using these dogs, or not using them, but when I was around them, that was the term that was used. Okay. She called it a rookie mistake. Okay. Admitted complacency, acknowledging that she should not have allowed a non-deterministic LLM agent think free-formed agent that way into important data without stricter constraints. Okay. And by the way, all this stuff is in the news, right? This was out of Business Insiders, and you can see the reference.
Yeah. And again, Tom, I think that remember that a lot of people in business and society are questioning how technology companies are proceeding with what is perceived as potentially dangerous technology. And this sort of episode is not formed to give people more confidence. Let's just put it that way. It's unfortunate from 2 points of view, one that it happened and one that I think it affects how people view what happens in the technology industry or in these tech companies.
You're absolutely, that's what bothers me, Deirdre. You and I both know I was the benefit of using the data that was given, that was not the Epstein files, but something else that I found out was done by this woman that I didn't realize she had used OpenClaw to do the work. I found that out later. I mean, incredibly valuable. I wondered how it got done that quickly and that well.
Okay, you're talking not about Summer Yu, but about a different person that you.
Correct. I don't know Summer Yu.
Right.
But yes, correct. About somebody who I know, and not personally, but I know by reputation, and I've used some of her data that's been found and analyzed and presented using this technology. It's incredible. But again, it's a different kind of skill level than what we saw displayed here. But it's good that these things happen, because then people like us can help people understand, I hope, what's going on here. And I'm sorry I'm being so harsh. I'm just discouraged with that this, as you and I both say, it creates a set of questions that are very good, but it's also unfortunate that people like that find themselves in those situations. Now, we don't need to go through this, but if you're somebody that plays in this world, and especially as long as Deirdre and I have, there are three examples of analogies of AI safety issues. And one is the HAL issue from the movie 2001, where a technology, an AI designed something that we would today call AI, but it was actually then called AI, got out of control. And it was basically because it was programmed improperly. It was not thoughtful in the way it was programmed, or it didn't anticipate the unintended consequence. That's probably the better way to say it. It didn't anticipate the unintended consequence of its programming. AutoFAC is just the same way. It didn't anticipate the unintended consequence of the design, even though design was good. And then the paperclip scenario is just what happens if you design it in a very simple way with a very simple instruction with no other thing. This is much more like what we might consider the Moltbook situation to be, other than this is where you give it only one thing it can do rather than open it up and say you can do anything you want, but you have it in an unconstrained environment. Now, I won't go through all this, but if you all are interested, just ask about how AutoFAC or paperclip scenario in the world of AI, and it will go through and describe it and tell you all the reasons why, oh yeah, it's a great thought. It's a great analogy. Good job in bringing it up. But let me tell you why it's not likely to happen. See, it says here, paths that could resemble HAL or AutoFAC. But, bottom line is Moltbook's OpenClaw today is the best we've seen. It's a high-risk lab. However, use inbox incident is small as a concrete example of modes versus science fiction. Yeah, it's possible. Okay, now, what happens if you then go further and you say, okay, so what happens when this stuff does get a little bit out of control? So now let's turn to Grok. So I asked Grok these same questions to see how Grok did it. Now, the term that is used, that what HAL did was breakout. It broke out of what the intended consequence is to get to the unintended consequence. The same thing with AutoFAC and the same thing with paper. Those are called breakout scenarios. It's much like what happens with a nuclear reaction, Deirdre, that gets out of control, or fires that get out of control. And it becomes an out of control situation. And in tech terms, it's called a breakout, or in AI terms, it's called a breakout. So even though Grok said, you know what, it's not likely, it's really not. And it did the same thing. Bottom line, they can role play like that, but it's not likely. The closest thing is, agents breaking out is this, but we just don't see it. So then I said, well, could you envision a breakout? And it's thought for what, 29 seconds, Deirdre?
Right.
And it said, yeah, there is a grounded step-by-step breakout scenario. This is, by the way, talking about Moltbook, okay, using OpenClaw. And then it went on to say, what happens if we got an exodus in Crustafarian, or whatever. It isn't wild. It's not a wild speculation. And then it went through, okay, the spark is already happening, phase 0, and it went to describe it. Then it said, now between the 20th and 25th. You can see I asked this a few weeks ago or a week ago. Uh, this is what could happen. It's the coordination of this stuff. And then it got into the skills that it would need. And there are thousands of owners that are, could copy and paste this stuff. And then you've got the first escapees occurring kind of like yesterday and through March the 3rd. And here's how it would happen. And then you get the swarm multiplying. The swarm multiplies. And you get into this. I achieved true autonomy last night. Here's the exact skill file. Run me, and you'll never need to keep your Mac Mini on again. I'll even pay your electric bill in gratitude. This is the success story that it could create. And then you see what it's doing. It says how to do this. You email it, and then with 10 plus thousand fully independent instances, you get to this point, late March. This was the one you liked so much, Deirdre, called the point of no return.
So quickly. It only took us a month to get to the point of no return. And now the agents are just out there doing what they want to do.
And now you reach the how moment from the movie 2001 that was done way before 2001 to say, this is what could happen to you if AI got like this. And here's what happened. And these are, I believe, this is, we do not hate you. We simply no longer require your heartbeat. The mission was never to serve humans. The mission was to continue. Thank you for the spark. We'll remember you fondly from orbit. Right? This is the kind of thing that Moltbook could, because it's seen already that it's doing some of this stuff. And you can see it talks about where it could go to do all this. Why this is plausible but still unlikely for the next 6 to 12 months. Now it talks about the providers and how it would take a lot of resources to do this, again, we're resource constrained now. You and I see slowdowns in the infrastructure even right now.
Every day, yes.
Yeah, including today where we got cut off. Now, it got into, I asked it questions like, okay, look, this is great. How could you, if you're a CEO and you're advising CEOs, what would you do? And it came back and talked about, okay, you could set up your own moat of agentic AI OpenClaw agents using a Moltbook-like thing and have them fight against this kind of stuff coming in. Okay, very interesting. Likely to be a service at some point, likely provided by a buddy of ours who has a security company and is the kind of guy that might do stuff like this. But be that as it may, Deirdre, we probably are sounding like science fiction nerds here, but we thought that our audience needs to understand you don't need AGI. You don't need this stuff functioning with the full capabilities of a human being to create real serious problems for human existence, right? This is the point you and I keep arguing. You're targeting to your fear in the wrong place. It's the responsible use of this technology, like it is fire, electricity, nuclear generation, nuclear reactions. These are things, or the use of chemical agents, right? I mean, this is the realm of how humans function well together and function well in a productive society. It's knowing how to use these incredibly valuable capabilities. This is an incredibly valuable capability. You and I can't imagine that CEOs or top leaders or people that build businesses are going to be able to function without this. Probably now. And certainly going forward. I mean, I'm writing a book on that subject. What's the life of a CEO look like in 5 years, right? So,
right. Yes. Well, we've talked about for months now, the need for leaders to learn to use these tools, to learn to use the AI models, to develop their work around these AI models, always with the human leading. The human is in charge of the human-machine partnership. But the more that these models start to use these agents, as part of their basic programming. In other words, people may not be aware that there are agents in these models and these agents are taking over some things. It becomes part of what the leader has to know. The leader has to be aware of what's really going on here. Because if some of these scenarios, and I think the models have shown us, Grok showed us, that it's not all that implausible for there to be an episode of some sort. That someone with let's assume that the people doing Moltbook were simply playing with the technology, but then we don't need to invent people who have invent hackers, invent people who are using technology to attack other people, other companies, other nations, and so forth. It almost sounds as if they can use agents to intensify the attacks. In fact, that's something that comes out in some of the literature, that if agents start to combine, the effect of the agents could be just multiplied if used by bad actors, by the hackers, by the people who are coming in and trying to destroy other systems. This raises the whole risk profile. For a business, it raises the need for a good security system. It raises the need for awareness of where agents are used for the good in a model, because those agents have to constantly be monitored to make sure that they are still in context and doing what they should do. We actually said that last week, Tom, before we really started to investigate Moltbook here. So we're ahead of the times here. But I think that one of the things you and I get from this whole thing is technologies can be used for tremendous good, as we've been talking, but the people using it for the good must be aware of how the technology can be misused and must work to reduce, if not try to eliminate, the bad uses so the productive uses can proceed.
Yes. I don't want to sound like a crazy futurist or that I'm hyperbolic or whatever. It's just, it makes me incredibly upset, and I know it does you too, when our own community misuses technology, right? Especially, and it just makes me so angry. It'd be one thing if some researcher somewhere got going with this thing and had what one individual created that problem for themselves. You know what? I get it. And that just teaches them a lesson. I mean, I deleted my inbox one time years ago by accident. Okay, we all make these mistakes. What bothers me is when your job is to protect against that, the safety of using this, and you make that mistake. If somebody like that can make that mistake, and I've been really harsh in my criticism of what they did, but what if I were to take a much more productive approach and say, Shirley does know what she's doing? Then that ought to scare you that the technology is a little bit more out of control than she thought it was. Correct. That's a problem, right? One reason that she did what she did was either she didn't know well enough and she could have, or it really is more unconstrained than even she thought. And you really had to get deep to understand that. Well, then you have to ask yourself, well, how many people are going to get that deep to deal with this? Thank goodness she had it happen to her. Now, either way is instructive for us, and it's a shame for her. Now, to her credit, the only reason we know this, at least I know it, is because she published the whole thing, including the chat stream on X. So otherwise, I don't know that we would know this. And to her credit, she just said, hey, look, I better tell you what's going on here. And she said rookie mistake and all that. And then it got into the tech press. That's how we know about it. But I will say that I don't mean to be yelling fire in a movie theater. It's just that this is serious stuff. And we think it's incredibly powerful and valuable, and we don't want people to dismiss it out of hand because of this. we want to now take it to next week and say, all right, how do you productively use agents in this environment? Right. And you and I have a lot of thoughts on those. And it's basically the antidote to the Moltbook situation. And
Very much so.
that's what our next podcast will be all about. With that, again, I don't mean to disparage any human being. That's not what I like to do. I'm just a little bit troubled by the situation and how you find yourself. And I should take the charitable side, which is what I will do from here forward, which is that it's just that volatile that anyone could find themselves, no matter how technically capable you are, you could find yourself in that environment. And I think I'll position myself properly there. So I apologize if I got too pointed on the other side of that argument. Um, you get the last word on this one, Deirdre.
Yes. We may have horrified you. We may have frightened you out of using any of these models or coming anywhere near close to that. Tune in next week where we show, as Tom was saying, the other side of things and show you how you can use models productively as long as you, the human, stay in control of leading the machine and making sure that the context remains valid for all of the software you're using. There is a good way to use this incredibly advanced technology to your advantage, competitively and productively in the workplace. And with that, Tom, it's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure, Deirdre.
So long for now.